Hello and good day. This is Tallybreeze Tutorials, and in this video we're going to discuss briefly how to set up your listing accounting rules in Tallybreeze. Let's get right to it. Okay, so as you can see, I already have a connection added to Tallybreeze between Airbnb and QuickBooks here. And so now it's a matter of setting up my listing rules for each listing. And so let's go ahead and select any listing here. I'll select the first one. So as you can see, you can do this one of two ways. Either you can manually set up your listings yourself with your own chart of accounts coming from QuickBooks Online that you have, or you can use one of our templates where we will set up the chart of accounts for you in QuickBooks Online in case you don't already have them. And so I will do that here. You notice you have multiple selections here, and we'll actually go over the templates in another video here. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Airbnb investment property. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and import that. All right, so the chart of accounts has now been loaded into QuickBooks Online, and we are now setting up the listing here with the template. Now, what is this page in general? What are we doing here? So basically, we are editing the accounting rules for this specific listing on Airbnb, and Tallybreeze primarily cares about two major events. It's reservation income events and reservation refund events. Now, 99% of the time, everything is income, but it is important to mention that we do need to have separate accounting rules for refunds when they take place, and we'll get into that. But first, let's talk about the income rules in this example. And what this rule is doing is this. For every reservation that Tallybreeze sees for this specific listing, we're going to generate an invoice for each reservation. And in this invoice, where the real magic happens is in the line items of the invoice. And on the very left-hand column is everything on the Airbnb side of things here. So what you might see in any itinerary from Airbnb will be listed in this column: the accommodation fare, cleaning fee, the Airbnb service fee, resolution adjustments, and so on. And then in the middle column here is everything coming from the QuickBooks side. All right, so if I were to click on one of these drop downs in this list here, this list right here is actually coming from the connected QuickBooks Online account itself. All right. So this is where our mapping between Airbnb and QuickBooks takes place. Essentially, this is the core of the integration setup itself. And another thing that you'll notice is, of course, we're gonna support QuickBooks classes. Now, this is very useful, especially when you want to divide your revenue and track the performance on a per listing basis. You're going to want to set up a QuickBooks class that is classification for each listing, and you could do so right here. And then you'll notice that we have very detailed descriptions here. You can see that we could put in the reservation code, the guest name, check-in date, checkout date, number of nights stayed. We can actually support, this is just the default. You can actually put in much more information we support here, but this is just the beginning. So let's talk about the actual, just briefly discuss this template itself. So the template is found in these 6 line items here. And what this template is pretty much saying in a nutshell is that 100% of everything collected from Airbnb is yours. And that is the Airbnb investment property template. And that is the case. If you were to actually own this listing, 100% of everything collected from Airbnb is indeed yours. And so that is what we have set up here. But let's say you have something different going on. Let's say that you are actually dividing, let's say, 10% from the accommodation. Let's say 90% of the accommodation fare is going into one account, and then the remaining 10% is going into another account. Well, you can do that. You could just add a line to the invoice, click accommodation fare, select add, and then allocate that remaining 10% into whatever account that you choose. And we will do that. So you'll have that 90%, 10% split between the accommodation fare. And you can do that for any particular line item, making this a very flexible system to set up for virtually all accounting scenarios in this industry. On the top left of the invoice, you'll notice that you have the ability to set the customer of the invoice. And what we have here is to set the guest as the customer, but you can actually set anything from QuickBooks as the customer as well. Okay, so this is our income rules. A brief talk about our refund rules. Now, refunds, 99% of the time, everything is income, but it is also important to set up separate rules for refunds when they take place. And what this does here is that for every refund that Tallybreeze sees from a listing, in this case, Tallybreeze is going to create a refund receipt in QuickBooks. And rather than using income codes, we're going to use refund codes. So that way you'll be able to track all of your refunds coming from Airbnb as well. Now, going back to income, something that we want to discuss here briefly is the options on the bottom of this invoice. You'll notice the second option here is the option to have Tallybreeze apply a payment to the invoice using the payment clearing account. Now, we recommend keeping this box checked here because what this does is it actually makes the bank reconciliation process more automatic on QuickBooks. So let's say, for example, if I were to uncheck this box here, what that means is that for every reservation that Tallybreeze sees for this listing, we would just create an invoice for the reservation, and that's it. What you would end up having to do from there is you would have to actually match that invoice to the bank statement lines manually in QuickBooks Online, which isn't something that we necessarily recommend, but we do provide it as an option for those who like to have more of that control. What we instead recommend to do is to keep this box checked. And if you do that, basically what Tallybreeze will do is not only will we create the invoice for each reservation, but we'll also make a payment to that invoice where we automatically transfer the sum amount to the what's called a payment clearing account. And what this does is it makes it very easy to reconcile. It makes it actually more automatic to reconcile the bank transactions. So rather than you having to match the invoice to the bank statement lines, all you have to do in QuickBooks is just create a bank rule in QuickBooks that says, hey, any money received that hits the bank account from Airbnb, just transfer it back to the Airbnb payment clearing account, and your bank reconciliation is then automatic. You'll notice that there's also this option right here is to show multiples and fixed amount, which we'll actually get into in more detail in another video. But just a brief explanation of this. Basically, this is the case where if you have a fixed amount that you want to allocate, let's say $100 for every reservation, well, then you could just use this to allocate that and it'll subtract that amount from your percentages. But we'll get that into more detail on that in another video. Okay, so the moment that I'm done with this setup, I would select to save and enable this listing. And from there, Tallybreeze will begin importing from that day forward. And you'll then have the option to import historical data from the past. And this concludes our video about setting up your listing accounting rules in Tallybreeze, and I will see you in the next video.